Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, as record energy prices hit consumers, how clean energy will help in the long run. Activists block UK oil terminals, demanding an end to reliance on fossil fuels. And feeding the people, boosting biodiversity. The Bristol gardener with one small answer to the climate crisis. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world, hear from the people being hit hardest by those changes, and report on the search for solutions. Now, it's the day many families have been dreading. The price cap on energy costs has risen more than 50%, a rise which will hit everyone, especially those on the lowest incomes. The bad news is that worse is to come in the short term, but longer term, there are solutions. Paul Kelso reports.
Britain was facing an energy crisis before Russia's invasion of Ukraine tightened an already historic squeeze on living standards. As energy prices rise more than 50%, the boss of Britain's fourth largest provider said worse is to come.
Price caps going up because we had a global energy crisis exacerbated by the terrible war in Ukraine. And in the short term, the UK is stuck with these energy prices. The reality, of the way our energy system works is that, if we're not buying Russian gas, even if the UK is not buying it, it will be diverted somewhere else. What we need to do as a society is start to wean ourselves off gas altogether.
In 6 months, natural gas prices have risen 7 times higher than pre-pandemic, but the increase we're paying today was set in February, 3 weeks before the invasion of Ukraine caused fresh volatility. Prices are forecast to rise even higher, up from today's £1,971 for average household dual fuel use to £2,600 in October, before falling back to £2,041 next April. The government has provided up to £350 in loans and grants to households, but this squeeze won't just pinch the poor.
One thing we found is that the number of people who are going to spend more than 10% of their total household budgets on energy is going to soar. If energy bills hit £2,500 this winter, we'll have a third of households paying 10% of their total budgets on energy bills, which is a sign of being what's called fuel stress, where you're struggling with your energy bills.
A government energy strategy setting out plans for renewables like solar and wind to loosen the grip of oil and gas has been delayed. But we already know we'll be relying on gas-fired power stations like this for years to come. Ending our reliance on hydrocarbons should be a virtuous circle, delivering cheaper, abundant energy with less environmental damage and dependence on dictators and despotic regimes. The trade-off is it's going to take decades. In the short term, cutting demand may be one of the few ways consumers can fight back.
If you insulate your home simply using loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, you cut your gas demand by 20%, which is a 20% reduction in your gas bill. And that can happen very, very quickly, in the short term. Whereas if you're looking at fracking or North Sea oil and gas, that's going to take years.
In Edinburgh, climate protesters mocked the West's reliance on Russia. For millions of families, this energy crisis is very real. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, let's take a look at our data dashboard now, because as we heard, the amount we pay for power is dictated by the energy sources we use. Today, we're using a lot of gas, 47%, and about a quarter is renewables. That's wind, solar and hydroelectric power. Now, if we look back over the previous 15 years, we can see how much this has changed. Coal, the dirtiest polluter, used to be far and away the most important source of electricity. As that's fallen away, wind power has risen from nowhere to provide almost a quarter of our electricity. And that's important because Sky News has seen figures suggesting that the cost of producing energy from wind will be less than half the cost of gas this year, falling to a quarter in 2023. So all this, the rocketing price of gas, soaring bills for consumers, the falling costs of renewables, will mean an even greater spotlight on the government's energy supply strategy. It's a plan that we were expecting to see this week, but it's been delayed. Well, joining me now is our political correspondent, Joe Pike. Hello to you, Joe Pike. So first, how much pressure is the government under to help with the cost of living?
a very significant pressure, Kimberly. I think it's only likely to grow as people really feel the effects of the change today, when bills start to appear on doormats and in email inboxes. And for Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, he knows it's not just opposition parties, but some within his own party who do not think there is enough support. His argument, though, is that a lot of it's out of his control. You're looking at big geopolitical dynamics in terms of the price of oil and the price of gas. And also, post-pandemic, the UK is not in the strongest financial position. Fiscal discipline is what he keeps on talking about. Hundreds of billions of pounds was spent getting us through COVID, and therefore there isn't, endless riches to keep spending to help people out. Let's touch on some of the other developments and measures that came into force today. VAT on energy-saving materials like solar panels, heat pumps and roof insulation will be reduced from 5% to 0 for 5 years. Green technology is now exempt from business rates, saving firms about £35 million for the new tax year. And you might be able to claim a grant of up to £6,000 to install low-carbon heating systems, such as heat pumps, through the boiler upgrade scheme. Of course, Kimberly, we don't really know what is going to happen next. Certainly in 6 months' time, there will be another decision on the energy price cap. I suppose it's possible it could rise. And certainly the government have not ruled out further measures being taken to help people if necessary. They would, though, argue there is quite a lot already they're doing in terms of council tax rebates, in terms of that cut to fuel duty, although it's only temporary, and a couple of other things too.
OK, Joe, and weren't we supposed to hear from the government on their energy supply strategy this week?
Yes, well, the government sources, Kimberly, now say it's pretty likely, highly likely next week. And what is fascinating is how Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine has completely changed the international conversation around energy security. That is now at the top of the political agenda in many countries, including ours. The big commitment sounds like, according to reports, a commitment on nuclear. The UK government will want a quarter of the UK's electricity needs to be nuclear by some date, possibly around 2050. So really ramping up nuclear energy production in this country. Not necessarily popular with people who don't necessarily want nuclear reactors near their homes. Wind, onshore wind, it is a bit controversial within the Conservative Party. That's an easy, quick way of ramping up energy production. But there are people, for planning reasons, local community reasons, who are not that keen on wind farms, and a lot of them are in the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson realised not a lot of his backbenchers are keen. But also, don't forget about oil and gas. We heard in the last few days that a licence for the Cambo oil field off the coast of Shetland, north of the Scottish mainland, that licence has been extended. That's pretty controversial. And all of this is different. The whole dynamics are different because of what's happened in Ukraine.
OK, Joe, thank you so much. Joe Pike for us there in Westminster. Right, well, let's have a look at some of the day's other climate news now. And oil terminals across England suspended operations this morning after environmental activists blocked roads. Supporters of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion began blockades at oil refineries around London, Birmingham and Southampton by climbing on top of tankers and gluing themselves to road services. They're demanding the government agree to halt all new licences for fossil fuel projects in the UK and have vowed to continue disrupting the UK's oil infrastructure until they agree. Now, the importance of wild salmon's being highlighted in an exhibition to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee at Balmoral Castle. The installation, called Salmon School, consists of 250 mirror glass forms suspended in the air. The exhibit aims to raise awareness about the importance of salmon conservation as climate change and biodiversity loss threaten their existence in the wild. Salmon conservation has been supported by the Queen. The Balmoral estate works closely with the River Dee Trust to help protect the endangered fish. The government is introducing a new tax on any plastic packaging that doesn't contain at least 30% recycled material. It was first announced in 2018 to encourage firms to be more environmentally friendly. It will apply to businesses producing or importing 10 tonnes of plastic or more a year. An important habitat for a rare bird species may have been damaged by wildfires this week. Slieve Bay, an area straddling both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, is an EU-protected habitat and home to the endangered hen harrier. There have been 2 fires in the area in the past few days, coinciding with the start of nesting season, which means that nests that have already been built will have been destroyed. Now, making the transition to a plant-based diet is one way an individual can help stop climate change. In our latest climate diary, we head to Bristol, where urban gardens are serving a dual purpose.
Okay, so we're going to plant out these rocket seedlings into this no-dig bed, which is really easy. All you need to do is pop your fingers in and plant the plant, and then give it a really good firm in, and we'll water that in a little while. We support communities to grow food in lost and unloved spaces across the city. So our main kind of driving force is to get people growing. Bristol's quite a wealthy city, or people have that kind of expectation of it. But the reality is 25% of children are always at risk of food poverty. All of the food that we grow in any of the gardens that we've helped to support is available to anybody who needs it or wants it. They can just come along and help themselves. In these gardens, the food goes directly into the Bristol Food Clubs, which supports young families effectively who are, having problems accessing affordable food.
Gardeners are increasing biodiversity because they're establishing plants that support pollinators. They are improving the hydrology of the land on which they live, because by reducing areas of tarmac, concrete, and so on, they're releasing those areas to the rainfall and allowing infiltration of rainfall more effectively into the soil. So the plants are doing all that, and of course they're taking in carbon dioxide, they're producing oxygen, so producing a healthier environment.
We're getting straight into discussing the climate issues of the day with the climate and industry lead at the TUC, Mika Mineo-Paluelo, and the editor-in-chief of Business Green, James Murray. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, energy prices have soared to record levels. What does this have to do with climate? A lot. In short, the less energy you use in your house, the less impact you have on the climate and the lower your bills. Let's look at these connections a bit more. And we have a couple of questions from Sky News viewers, which you, Mika and James, might be able to help us with. But first, can I get a top tip for you on how to save energy? Mika, do you want to go first?
I feel like a lot of people have already been trying to do this over the past year. They've already done most of the things that can be done, turning down thermostats, wearing extra jumpers. Martin Lewis has said, well, there isn't... Ultimately, it's up to government at this stage. If you've got the money, then insulate your home. The people who've got the resources, wonderful to put that into insulating home, to reducing how much gets used. But the majority can't afford that at this stage.
James, what about you? What's your top tip?
I think I'd echo that. I mean, it depends on your circumstance. If you have the money, the way that bills have gone up and the cut in VAT that's just come into effect today and the new grant scheme for heat pumps means that all these technologies that were already quite attractive are now really financially attractive. They'll save you money quite quickly. Solar panels, insulation, heat pumps. So if you are sitting on some savings, you'll get a better return on that than you would sitting in an ISA, and that becomes a financially sensible and an environmentally beneficial thing to do. But of course, the tragedy of this situation is millions and millions of households do not have savings, or they might be living in homes where that's not appropriate. And that's why you're seeing businesses, civil society, trade unions, and environmental groups all saying exactly the same thing, which is the government needs to do more, as other governments have, as we've seen the French government, the German government, comparable economies are trying to do more to protect people from these price rises.
Absolutely. It's such a worrying time. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But let's have a look at the first question we have. Graham sent it in, and he has asked, why have electricity prices risen the way they have when suppliers say that it's from renewable sources? Mika.
So a lot of our electricity still comes from gas, and ultimately, because of the way our energy system is structured, the market way it's structured means that even if your electricity is coming from wind, the price is set by gas. And that points to how our energy system as a whole is bust. That we were told for years, switch supplier, and you'll get this outcome. And ultimately, that was all nice and good. But right now, in the crisis, whoever you've switched to, pretty much your bills are going up, wherever it's coming from. And that means that we need to change the system as a whole. It needs fundamental change. We would say that public ownership should play a significant role. That gives more control, more ability. We're seeing that in a lot of the rest of Europe. We could have that here too.
Okay, James, what do you think to what Graham asked?
I mean, much the same. Unfortunately, the way the market is structured means that the gas price effectively sets the price. You can tweak it down a little bit the more renewables you use, but ultimately, unfortunately, the gas price, and that's a wholesale gas price, an international gas price, if you will. It doesn't matter how much we import from Russia compared to others. That shock will just feed through into the system, and it pushes up the price of renewables as well as gas. So there are people looking at this. They're looking at how we can structure the market differently so that the lowest cost marginal form of power, which is almost invariably renewables, can have a bigger impact on the overarching price. But unfortunately, it's that sort of long-running work that takes a lot of time. And as we stand, gas is setting the price, and gas is very high and very volatile. That's the other really worrying thing here. It could get worse. If the Ukraine situation continues to deteriorate, you could see further pressure on prices.
Right, because the current rise in prices doesn't even reflect what's happened in Ukraine, does it?
Not as yet, no. I mean, the worrying thing is that the price cap's going to get reviewed again in autumn. It could go higher still. We're seeing the Kremlin saying they could turn off gas tapped exports to Europe altogether in response to the sanctions. We're seeing the Ukrainian government quite rightly say, please ramp up the sanctions to include oil and gas, and please could you stop importing it because it is funding Putin's war machine. So, you know, there is a very real risk of it going higher, and it depends on that geopolitical context.
Mika, when you say we need a fundamental change in the market, is that the international market you're looking at or the local market and how we're structured in here? How would you change it, and how long do you think it would be to bring about that change?
So I mostly mean in the UK, because that's where the government has the most power. And ultimately, what we have now is a market that was designed, created in the 80s and 90s. And as I said, it's bust, it's failed. It's failed to deliver secure and affordable energy. There's a significant role for public ownership of energy instead of this whole switch from one supplier to another supplier, actually having suppliers, whether they're locally owned by councils, nationally, providing that affordable energy. Government can choose to keep it the way it is, which is ultimately serving mostly richer people, or provide a solution for everybody. Now, that is something that we need that's transformational. But you're right, it won't help tomorrow. And that's why we'd say the Chancellor should come back now with an emergency people's budget. He did that during COVID. It's perfectly feasible for him to come back next week. Maybe it'll take him 2 weeks, come back with revised proposals where he lays out how he will increase universal credit, boost pay, boost pensions, but also provide the immediate relief that's needed to the millions of families being driven into poverty by the energy price hikes. And the money is available. Right? We heard earlier from your reporter that Sunak's not sure where to find the money. Well, actually, we're seeing oil and gas companies raking in billions and billions in profits because of the war in Ukraine, because of the misery that people are being pushed into from these high bills. There's a direct transfer, even from people on minimum wage, of hundreds of pounds to these companies who are profiteering. Now, actually, it's perfectly fine to have a windfall tax on those companies. Pensioners, the pension holders, who are only a small proportion of the investors, would still be getting high returns. And that could then be redistributed through the warm homes discount or other mechanisms to the people who are in the largest poverty. It's the Chancellor has the choice right now whether he wants to be a poverty Chancellor or bring us an emergency people's budget. It's a choice, but he's not making it.
Okay, James, I want to pick up on a point you made earlier, because that does tie into the second question we have. It was sent in by an anonymous Sky News viewer. Have a look at this. Why is the rise in energy price here higher than in Europe? James?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons. It varies based on which market you're looking at. That part of the bill here is to pay for green levies that fund energy efficiency schemes and renewables contracts and the warm home discount and other grant schemes. In Germany, they moved quite quickly to take those type of levies off of the bill. So that reduced the bills a bit there. They've also just gone in provided more direct funding support to kind of to keep the bills down in a sort of quite a statist way that some would argue is not necessarily beneficial in the long run, but it has held down prices in France and Germany in a way that it hasn't here. I mean, the other thing to say about a lot of these countries is the UK has some of the most inefficient housing and office buildings in Europe. Even though we're a northern European country, even though our climate is quite cold, as we're finding this week, we have some of the draftiest and dampest and coldest country buildings in Europe, and we've had that for decades. And other governments have done a lot better at providing incentives and direct funding and tax breaks that have encouraged people to improve their homes over time, made it more financially attractive for them to do so. And as a result, their buildings are more efficient, which means you're using less energy, which means your bills are lower, means that when you have a shock like this, it's easier to absorb. And we, over decades, have consistently failed to do that. And as a result, when prices go high, that becomes a serious problem because we use so much energy in our homes.
Okay, Mika, we've got about 30 seconds here, half a minute. Do you think that it's such a dire time, whether you look at what's happening in Ukraine or the energy crisis here, the cost of living crisis, do you think ultimately, though, some good could come out of this in that, in the long term, we will move to cleaner energy?
Yes, and the time is now. The Chancellor has to act, the government has to act, and this is an opportunity. It's a disastrous situation we're in. But let's say the government comes out and rolls out an ambitious insulation program led by councils that could slash bills, could reduce dependence on gas, reduce Putin's power, could create hundreds of thousands of jobs. It would create a better future for us now in the immediate term, also for our children, for our children's children, for future generations, create a healthier society. It's entirely possible, and now is the time for government to act.
Okay. Mika and James, thank you so much. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.
And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, there it is. You can listen to the latest edition of the Sky News Climatecast. Today's edition, Anna Jones speaks to Karen Isaac, who's being pushed into fuel poverty because of those rising bills. Our science and tech editor, Tom Clark, tells us what lies ahead in the energy crisis. You can subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. Well, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.